I honestly, I mean, it sounds almost fictional the way that you describe the party running. Not that I think that you're wrong or anything like that, but I'm just thinking from my frame of reference, this is just wild. It sounds like a party of insane people. I mean, I was reading Frank Dicotta, a historian, talking about Mao and how he was the personification of truth and various other insane phrases like this. The great leader can never be wrong and things. To what extent has that kind of mentality been preserved within the party, do you think?
Well, the party certainly was kind of terrified of another Mao rising up because it didn't really go so well for them. So what you saw after Mao, well, first of all, to handle all of the sort of bad publicity of Mao, they kind of blamed everything on his wife and executed her. So all of the bad things were her fault, and she was executed.
And the Gang of Four.
The Gang of Four. So after that, what you sort of saw was they called it like collective leadership, that the party would be run by the Politburo Standing Committee. That's the top 7 most powerful people in the Communist Party. An interesting fact, it's 7, but after Jiang Zemin stepped down, the one who started the persecution of Falun Gong, when the other guy, Hu Jintao, stepped in, Jiang was able to expand the Politburo to 9 members and fill all of those seats with his people. So that was how he managed collective leadership. But so the party has been kind of resistant to sort of this central leader. That kind of began to change with Xi Jinping, simply for the fact that Xi Jinping is not part of the Jiang faction. And so a big part of what's happening in China today is this power struggle between Xi Jinping and the clique tied to Jiang Zemin. And so that is why you have seen Xi Jinping, by necessity, for him to stay alive, assuming more and more personal power within the party. But at the same time, he has to kind of watch, like, he's walking on the edge of a sword. Like, if he becomes too overtly like a Mao too quickly, the rest of the party apparatus will react and will try to curtail him. But he's done it very strategically and very carefully until now he is essentially a leader for life.
And he started this anti-corruption campaign basically to purge people who were, against him. So,
yeah. Tied in Jiang. And that's purged, did you say more than 1 million Communist Party officials? That was a couple years ago even that it reached 1 million. So a lot of people have been purged.
Right. I mean, Christ. Okay. Let's.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it just sounds like. I mean, it just sounds like the sort of politics of the 20th century that I guess that people had hoped we'd left behind at this point, because you can't imagine anything like that going on in the West, really. Okay, so let's talk about the Uyghurs and the situation there, because we have many news reports from places that are considered to be credible that there is an open persecution of the Uyghurs going on. They've been put into camps. Many of them have been killed. There is allegations of an attempt at kind of ethnic cleansing by assigning Chinese men to these families while the men are away. So hopefully they'll breed with their wives and things like that. Is there how much truth is there to all of this, and what's the situation?
Well, let me put it this way. This isn't new. They did it to Falun Gong. They did it to Mongolians in Inner Mongolia. They did it to the Tibetans. This is not new. The Chinese Communist Party has been very brutal with the ethnic minorities in the territory they essentially conquered. Breeding them out of existence, making sure they can't speak their own language, can't partake in their own culture. This has been happening throughout the 70 years of the Chinese Communist Party's history.
So it's interesting with the persecution of the Uyghurs that one of the interesting things is that it's actually being talked about in the West, and this wasn't really the case, except for, in the 90s there was kind of the Free Tibet.
But nobody talks about the genocide that happened in Mongolia, Inner Mongolia.
Right.
No,
but
I
I
had
think,
no idea.
Yeah.
I think that was like one of the earliest ones, like right after they took power in 1949. So, it's a lot easier to get rid of stuff about something that happened, that long ago. But I think with the Uyghurs, what you're seeing is kind of every time they have one of these political campaigns, they kind of are able to refine some of their tactics and use them on the next group.
Sorry. Sure.
So with the Mongolians, they were like, okay, what can we do to make them like pliable. And like, one things that they did was they moved a lot of Han Chinese people into Inner Mongolia, so that now the Mongolians are actually outnumbered by the Han Chinese in the area. So that's something that worked. So they did the same thing in Tibet, and then they did the same thing in Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are. So they kind of take these tactics and use them. Like with Falun Gong, a lot of the things they were doing were these transformation classes, where it was basically brainwashing, where they put you in a room and then like made you watch videos over and over again about how bad Falun Gong was and how the party was just trying to save you. Like they were basically breaking people psychologically, and they found that worked. So then they brought that idea to Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. So then you had these, camps where it was like re-education camps.
Making them eat pork, making them shave their beards.
And just doing things like, singing songs about the Communist Party, having to, learn all of these, like, what the law is, like, to kind of de-extremify them is kind of what the Communist Party uses that term. But what it is really a type of brainwashing and psychological torture. And they found that worked with Falun Gong, so now they're using it on the Uyghurs.
And kind of going back to what you were saying earlier about the narrative, after 9/11, you saw the Communist Party start talking about the Uyghurs using, they used to call them like separatists, but then after 9/11 they called them terrorists.
Right.
Yeah, similar thing with Falun Gong, where like in Chinese, the word that they use for Falun Gong is heterodox organization, which means some kind of religious organization that is not approved by the state. But in the West, they started using the word cult because it's much more effective to make people believe that you're fighting against terrorists or you're fighting against a cult.
They'll call it China's Scientology, try and make people in the West connected to something else.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go on. No, go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
so just like one of the difference between what's happening to the Uyghurs versus Falun Gong is just because Falun Gong was sort of scattered, people were just Chinese people scattered throughout China. The Uyghurs are in a specific part of China, and so for the persecution of the Uyghurs, you can see in satellite images massive concentration camps being built to house these people. That wasn't something that you really saw before. So in a way, it is just very, it's more visceral than a lot of the other persecutions.
Back when reporters were still allowed to go into Xinjiang, you could see the security apparatus that was being built there, where there would be these mobile police stations like on every block, and people would be stopped so that the police could look at their phones, could see if they had any kind of questionable apps like Skype on them. It would be just like the way that the security apparatus has kind of taken control of Xinjiang is kind of a new iteration of what they've been able to accomplish through persecuting the Uyghurs. So that is something that, now they're going to take to apply to, the rest of the country.
We actually interviewed a reporter from, I forget which Arab country. Do you remember?
Azerbaijan.
Was that it?
I think.
Well, so anyways, this Arab journalist was he kind of bought into the Communist Party's propaganda about what was happening to the Uyghurs. That it was just something being exaggerated by the United States. And
Albania. Okay, sorry.
Oh, it was Albania.
Yeah.
And so then he went on like a guided tour of one of these camps in Xinjiang. This was the Communist Party thinking like, oh, we'll get all of these journalists from the Middle East and show them propaganda. But they were just so bad at like spinning it. Like the guy went there and he was like, oh my gosh, the things I'm seeing are awful. It's all true. He just completely bungled the propaganda campaign because it was just so obvious to any faithful Muslim what was happening, that it was just that they were destroying their belief.
It was interesting because this guy was a hardcore socialist.
Yeah.
And had definitely believed that like all of the stories about Xinjiang were just like American imperialism, Western propaganda. And then he went there and saw what was happening and came out just like completely against the Chinese Communist Party, talking everywhere about like what a horrible thing this was and what he witnessed.
Because there's a lot of silence from the media and governments in the Middle East that are just very quiet about the persecution of the Uyghur Muslims. They prefer to take cash from China.
I found that very, very bizarre myself. You'd think if the communists in China were persecuting Muslims, you'd think other Muslim countries would stand up and say something. But many Muslim governments have literally said no, nothing's going on, haven't they? Like Iran, didn't Iran say something to this effect, as if there's no problem? I assume they've been paid off.
Well, Iran, I mean, China is one of the biggest supporters of Iran geopolitically. So they buy Iranian oil. They help, kind of Iranian companies, Iranian government evade U.S. sanctions. That's why the CFO of Huawei is in prison, is under house arrest in Canada right now, because the U.S. has accused her of helping, Huawei and Huawei helping Iran evade U.S. sanctions. So, Iran is very beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. There's no way that they will talk about this. Or even a country like Turkey, which...
The Uyghurs are Turkic, a Turkic ethnicity.
And the biggest Uyghur exile community outside of China is in Turkey. So a lot of people flee China. They managed to make it to Turkey. And recently, China sold Turkey 20 million doses of their coronavirus vaccine.
Controlling the narrative.
And in return, the Chinese state media was talking about how Turkey's prime minister not only was praising China's vaccine and how great it was, but also saying that Turkey stands with China in its fight against terrorism. That they will not allow people inside Turkey to smear China's counterterrorism efforts or to smear China's sovereignty over their own territory. So what this means is that now it's quite dangerous for the Uyghurs who have fled to Turkey, because Turkey is essentially, in exchange for these coronavirus vaccines, affirming the Chinese Communist Party's persecution of the Uyghurs.
What a deal. They covered up the virus, it spreads around the world, and then they use that as a lever on all these countries. So,
I mean, there are going to be people who are saying, who are going to say things like, well, China engineered the virus. China did this on purpose. China, this may be part of some 4D chess maneuver from China across the global stage. Do you think there's any truth to any of that, or is that just hyperbole?
I'm kind of a believer in Occam's razor, honestly. We might not ever really know how the coronavirus began, because the Communist Party has been very successful at preventing independent investigations. They made sure the World Health Organization didn't. When Australia called for an independent investigation, they launched a massive trade war against Australia and a propaganda campaign, calling them the white trash of Asia, I think.
And the allegations of war crimes in Afghanistan and things like this. What I would describe as just openly warlike rhetoric, as if unacceptable rhetoric, frankly.
Well, that's the thing about communism, is you always are at war. You're always struggling against someone or something. That's fundamental to communism. That's how history progresses. Carl, don't you know that?
I actually do know that. Didn't Mao change the Soviet view of the revolution to a continual revolution, a never-ending revolution? Wasn't that part of the strategy?
I feel like that was every communist, so I don't know if we can give Mao sole credit for that. But yeah, he said stuff like that.
What's interesting, too, about the coronavirus is the Chinese Communist Party's attempt to blame it on everybody else. And the more they do this kind of thing, the more it looks suspicious to people. Because I think in the beginning, when they were saying it was from a wet market, it was totally believable that that was the case, because that's kind of where SARS came from. In 2003, bird flu has been a problem in Chinese wet markets for years.
I totally believed the story myself. It seemed to make sense.
And now with this whole Wuhan Institute of Virology, how much they're trying to keep people from looking into that. It was an interesting BBC report that came out yesterday about how the BBC tried to go to... Back in 2012, there was a group of miners in southwestern China in a province called Yunnan that were in this copper mine called the Mojiang mine, and they got sick with some kind of weird pneumonia that was probably caused by a bat coronavirus that they found out. And the Wuhan Institute of Virology had actually collected samples of this bat coronavirus, and they had been kind of experimenting with it, even though at the time when this first came out, a few months ago, it was at first said that they weren't doing anything. They just kept it on deep freeze. But then it came out that they had been experimenting with this and had taken up to like 5 different types of coronaviruses from both that cavern and surrounding caves. And the BBC tried to go to that mine and were tailed by Chinese security services. They were, they were stopped by people blocking their way. They weren't ever allowed to go. So when you see stuff like that happening, it seems kind of more suspicious because, although at the beginning they also tried to keep people from going to the wet market. But like this kind of stuff definitely, especially now that the WHO is saying that they're not going to investigate bat coronaviruses in China, but they are going to do it in Southeast Asia, which is odd.
And just for a little bit of context, there were, I forget what year, but there are instances of like SARS leaking out of like a virology lab in Beijing. So they don't necessarily have the best security measures in these labs. So some people think it might have come from like the Wuhan lab, not necessarily as like some kind of engineered weapon, but as something that just slipped out.
Yeah.
But I mean, really, who knows? We'll never know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on this. If something like that were true, I would be far more inclined to ascribe it to incompetence rather than malice. But right, okay. So last question. What do you think the how to phrase it? I want to phrase it correctly. How would it be possible to dislodge the Chinese Communist Party from their position of rule over China from within China? Are there? I mean, they surely can't be like dissident factions who are openly opposing the party at this point. And so, I mean, like it seems from the impression I get from the outside that the party has just got hooks in every aspect of society and every aspect of politics. So I have no idea how it could possibly end.
Well, so a big reason the Communist Party, as corrupt and inept as it is still in power is because of support from the West. Wall Street pumping billions of dollars into the market. Western tech companies like Cisco building the Great Firewall, building their horrible surveillance system. That's all built by the West. I think one of the biggest things that can be done is for the Western world, and this will require just your average citizen becoming more educated about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing. People can no longer treat the Chinese Communist Party as if it's just any other government in the world. It is a gangster regime. It harvests organs from citizens. It has concentration camps. Because of the one-child policy for a number of years, it was illegal to have brothers or sisters. That cannot be treated like a country where you can just do business with, where you have like Apple or Nike, very socially justice-minded companies fighting against forced labor bills that would block forced labor from China. So when the Western world wakes up and stops supporting this kind of evil, that will go a huge way towards the Chinese people actually being able to have the power to challenge this regime. Because being propped up so much by the West makes it very hard for the people in China.
Yeah, I think that, we've talked to Chinese dissidents who say that, actually a lot of Chinese people are very unhappy with the party. They just cannot express that in any way that we could see visibly in the West, because even, posting a comment on the internet can get you thrown in prison. And people know that. So there's a lot of self-censorship. But there is dissatisfaction with the party in China. If there was a major economic problem, some kind of economic collapse, I think that's when you would see, people coming out in the streets and things like that, if they were no longer so afraid of the security apparatus. And I think, the Chinese Communist Party is very aware of the fact that they have to maintain the economy above all else. And as Chris said, Western multinational corporations have been one of the major ways that we've been pumping money into the Chinese Communist Party since the 90s.
Our media censors on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party.
It's it's a huge problem. And now, with the coronavirus and all of this news about how it's devastating economies around the world, the Chinese Communist Party is making a huge push for these, Wall Street and all of these other companies to come into China, buy Chinese bonds, invest in China's stock market, because the Chinese economy is growing, quote unquote, using their own numbers. So, the idea is that we kind of bailed them out once by pumping so much money into the system, and if we don't stop, we're going to do it again. We're going to keep propping up this regime.
The number of articles we've seen of advice, invest in Chinese bonds now. Now's the time. It's insane.
Why would you trust the Chinese Communist Party with anything? I mean, if I was going to, do business in another country, I wouldn't do business in a country where the government was A, communist and against the idea of property ownership, and B, obviously tyrannical, like the Chinese Communist Party has been. I would be thinking, well, okay, maybe, it's like getting into bed with a lion or something. Sure, I might not get him right away, but at some point, someone's getting bitten, right?
Honestly, we did an episode about this. It's a giant Ponzi scheme.
But I think that people keep doing it. People keep doing it because there's a lot of willful ignorance going on, I think, where, the Chinese Communist Party has been able to just fool the world with, building skyscrapers and high-speed trains. And we keep reporting about, how glittery and new and futuristic all of this is. And the Chinese Communist Party officials are, these engineers. So they know how to, all of this kind of propaganda that we believe. And then you have businesses going into China and they're all getting screwed, but they're afraid to talk about how their property was stolen, how, how they were spied on, or, it's just very embarrassing. So they don't want to say it. So then, more and more companies, more and more industries go into China thinking this is the future, and nobody talks about what's really happening. And I think part of that is, embarrassment, and part of that is, willful ignorance, and part of it is people are, the Chinese Communist Party does something called elite capture, which is they try to influence and get on their side the, prominent academics, prominent business people, prominent politicians, and kind of get them to think that oh yeah, China is just a great place where we can make money. And
by the way, Hunter Biden is completely Russian disinformation. Carry on, Shelley.
Okay. But it is that kind of system that they've set up so that, even when companies are losing millions of dollars in China, they won't talk about it.
See, now I should have used the metaphor of a Venus flytrap. That's how it sounds to me. There's something very sweet and tempting on offer, but I'd expect a trap to shut. But anyway,
devoured.
Thank you so
much on the show.
Yeah, right. It's not a bad one. I knew I had a good one in me. But thanks so much for coming on, and I'm so glad that I've been introduced to your channel and to the work you're doing, because I've been working a lot on my knowledge of China and Chinese history recently, and it sounds like you guys are a great place to continue that education. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, pleasure. And anyone watching, please feel to check us out, China Uncensored. We're also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Shelley, you have a good tweet.
Oh, my Twitter is at Shelzhang, SHELZHANG.
And we also have another channel about U.S. politics called America Uncovered.
And we have a podcast on China.
That's right.
Called
Great.
China Unscripted.
I always forget that one.
Okay, we'll try to leave links to those on the page or in the description wherever we're hosting this. So thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you again.
Pleasure.